As we were walking, we started to go into an emotional flashback.
hmm
And we started to experience real shifts in our internal state. And the most interesting thing is that the environment started to change around us, the way everything looked.
The people on the green belt, it's like their faces changed to
Yes.
only reflect danger.
Yes.
And the trees looked like this bright open space was literally like a tunnel
Caving in on us.
caving in, and the trees started to turn inward, and the color changed. I remember too. It was like it got darker.
Today's episode is for anyone who's had big feelings that come out of nowhere that can thrust you into a different reality, distorting the world through a lens of distrust, fear, and confusion. It's for all our listeners who identify with complex trauma and practitioners who are supporting clients through CPTS patterns and who want science-based, somatic, actionable frameworks and tools for recognition and repair of these patterns.
Have you ever felt your chest drop, your jaw clench, and the room tilt? No memory, just a tidal wave of somatic shame, fear, or rage. That's not overreacting. That's part of an emotional flashback, one of the defining features of complex trauma. And today we'll show you how to spot it, observe it, and create change physiologically. Welcome to Trauma Rewired, the podcast that teaches you about your nervous system, how trauma lives in the body, and what you can do to heal. I'm your co-host, Jennifer Wallace. I'm a neurosomatic psychedelic preparation and integration guide, and I bring your nervous system into your peak somatic experiences. I'm an educator at the Neurosomatic Intelligence Coaching Certification, as well as the founder of Sacred Synapse, an educational YouTube channel where we explore the intersection of psychedelic research, neuroscience, and your nervous system through the lens of neurosomatic intelligence.
And I'm your co-host, Elisabeth Kristof, founder of brainbase.com, an online community where we use applied neurology and somatics to repattern stress responses, create behavior change, and resilience. And I'm also the founder of the Neurosomatic Intelligence Coaching Certification, an ICF-accredited course for healers, coaches, therapists, practitioners who want framework and tools to bring the nervous system into all of the good work that you're doing. And make sure to subscribe on your favorite audio platform or on our YouTube channel so that you don't miss an episode. We've got a lot of great things coming up in the pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we're re-recording one of our most important and most downloaded Trauma Rewired episodes on emotional flashbacks. And this was originally part of our CPTS series. And we looked at the 5 distinguishing characteristics of complex trauma, including toxic shame, the inner critic, social anxiety, self-abandonment, and emotional flashbacks.
And emotional flashbacks are just too big, too important, and too connected to this season on emotional health, affective neuroscience, and post-traumatic growth not to dive back into. The traditional definition of an emotional flashback is defined by Pete Walker as sudden, often prolonged regressions into overwhelming feeling states from early abuse and neglect. Gabor Mate described them as physio-emotional time warps, but our NSI definition is just a little bit different.
Yeah, I want to talk about those definitions a little bit more deeply and why they're so important. But from an NSI perspective, an emotional flashback is a state of being that comes from a trigger. So that could be an acute trigger, like something in your environment or a smell or a sound. It could also be a pattern that your nervous system recognizes, a combination of triggers that ignite a whole neurotag. And when that happens, it lights up a neurotag, a pattern recognition in our brain that creates cognitive change, emotional change, physical change in the body. And often, for those of us with CPTS, that's thrusting us back into a previous state, a state that reflects a time either in our development or a time of prolonged stress. And we experience these big emotions like abandonment, disgust, despair, loneliness, isolation, rage, and they feel really big and disproportionate maybe to what's going on. And the key difference between like Pete Walker's original definition is that he talks about them being a regression back to an earlier state. But from an NSI perspective, we are really changing in that moment. Our internal state, the way that our brain filters information, everything that's making it to our consciousness. So it's a real-time shift in our brain and our body that actually changes our present moment. And so it's like we are thrust into a new reality in the present because trauma doesn't just live in the past, it's the pattern that is replaying in the present in real time.
And it really is this time warp where the past is being recreated in the present moment,
Mhm.
and it changes the lens of all of the way that we're viewing our lives, ourselves, what's happening around us, and it really is a deep survival response. And it's not that there's not truth to it, but it's not necessarily the truth of the present moment, it's the truth of the past experience
That is still living in
that is
us.
still living in us. And when I think back, really, I must have lived so much of my life in emotional flashback. I mean, it was shaping so much of my reality that once I kind of got the understanding and the awareness and really the ability to shift it, that I came to realize like, wow, this has been a huge part of my reality. And part of this is not necessarily true. And it gave me a lot of self-compassion for myself, but
Mhm.
it was so empowering to be able to work in my nervous system, to be able to work with my emotions and to shift the pattern. And I can't remember honestly the last time I had an emotional flashback. So, years ago when we were recording this conversation originally, emotional flashbacks were still kind of around,
Mhm.
but now honestly, I can't remember.
Yeah, me too, me too. And I remember when we first started reading and diving into the world of complex trauma, we read Pete Walker's book, Complex Trauma from Surviving to Thriving. And that was when I really first learned about the concept of an emotional flashback. And I remember us having conversations just like, you know,
Yeah.
because it's like you said, like you could see how much of your life we'd been pushed into these states, and I was looking at relationships, I was
Mhm.
looking at environments, I was looking at myself through these distorted lenses of that old pattern in my system that was being activated by these little cues from my environment, or maybe from someone else, from their
Yeah.
tone or their posture. And it was just so important for beginning to understand how we could work with it, and then going on to learn about neurotags and linking this idea of that a flashback is a neurotag, and we'll talk more about that. But and then, like you said too, it is really amazing because at the time when we were first recording about complex trauma, and that was in 2022 when we did our CPTS series, and it was a very regular occurrence for me to still go into a flashback, and it would sometimes last a day or 2, and
Mhm.
sometimes it would last for months at a time. And
They're
and
painful.
it is painful.
Mhm.
And what started to happen first is that I could see that I was in the flashback. Just that awareness was really helpful in the beginning. But then I began to actually work with it, with the neural repatterning, and like you said, like, I really as we were preparing for this recording now in 2025, I was thinking, like, "When is the last time I've had an emotional flashback?" And I couldn't remember. It's been at least a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um
When I think about emotional neglect, which is also one of the conversations that we're having during our break this season, I think about their connection and
Mhm.
how the emotional neglect would trigger an emotional flashback for me, and how much coming out of understanding emotional neglect helped me get above the emotional flashbacks.
These are 2 episodes that should be listened to together,
Yeah.
so hopefully folks will do that. So, when we were learning about emotional flashbacks, we had a really interesting experience where it just became so clear what happened. We were walking on the green belt.
We asked for this experience too.
Yes, we
Remember?
did,
We
we
did. We
did.
set an intention that day, like, to show us an emotional flashback,
Yeah. We sure did. Be
and we
careful
got
what you
it.
ask for. So we were walking on the green belt here in Austin, which is this beautiful trail, and it was during the time of a music festival that happens here as well, ACL. So we were walking down the green belt, headed to Barton Springs to go swimming, but there were a lot of people from the festival down on the green belt that wouldn't normally be there. And at Barton Springs, a lot of people who are maybe using substance, a lot of like unknown people, just a lot more people than would normally be down in the greenbelt with us. And all those strangers, maybe a little bit not fully present because of substance use,
Mhm.
maybe not fully safe for us, started to impact our nervous system. And then as we were walking, we started to go into an emotional flashback.
Mhm.
And we started to experience real shifts in our internal state, racing heart, feeling of bracing, feeling the need like we needed to flee and get out of there. And the most interesting thing is that the environment started to change around us. The way everything looked, the trees looked ominous, like they were reaching
Mhm.
down to get us.
Mhm.
It seemed like everything got darker. And our whole perception of reality shifted because of the way our state shifted
Mhm.
inside.
And I cycled through many F responses because remember, I started to get really tired and shutting down. Like I wanted to get airlifted out of the greenbelt.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden we flighted where we were just walking so fast. And like the people on the greenbelt, it's like their faces changed to
Yes.
only reflect danger.
Yes.
And the men felt so unsafe on the greenbelt. And the trees looked like this bright open space was literally like a tunnel
Caving in on us.
caving in and the trees started to turn inward and the color changed, I remember too. It was like it got darker and we had to stop. We stopped, we said a prayer, we grounded ourselves, we did some NSI tools
Yes.
and we connected
Mhm.
and then we carried on and we got ourselves out of there. But after we did that, the light changed, it opened back up, it became our beautiful safe place again.
Yeah.
But it really was like the world tilted and shifted for at least I don't know, an hour maybe?
Mhm. And it wasn't until we worked with our nervous system, co-regulating with one another, shaking, processing, using our tools, that we were able to shift out of the flashback and
Yeah.
truly all of a sudden, it was like I saw the beautiful flowers again. The sun was coming down again. People were walking by and they're like, "Hey," and we're like, "Oh, hello," And it's like my reality does change
Yeah.
to match that. And I want to talk a little bit about why that is to connect some dots for people. It's the way that our brain filters information
Mhm.
because we have so much data coming into our brain all of the time from our sensory systems, just way more than we could ever be cognitively aware of without being completely overwhelmed. And so our brain processes that data through a filtering system, deciding what's important and what's not important. And if we're in a stress state, one of our F responses, our brain is really scanning for cues of threat, whether that's social or emotional or physical threat, right? Our brain is looking for evidence to match that internal state and also looking to protect us by making that evidence more important. So then in my cognitive mind, the reality that I'm experiencing is changing to be a reflection of the pieces of data that my brain is letting make up to my conscious
Mhm.
awareness,
Mhm.
which is the threatening sensory information.
And we have also the real lived experience that men can be dangerous,
Mhm.
that even the beautiful spaces that we walk in and that we know very well can also be threatening to
Mhm.
people, not just women, but to people out on the green belt. And so having all of that like lens shift and then to really see it was a huge experience. I mean, we got exactly what we asked for. We got a learned lived experience. And then I think it was vital for us to have that so that we can reflect it back
Mhm.
to you, the listener.
And to also have some altitude for ourselves, right? To
Yeah.
see, oh man, reality actually changes in this state. And so now when I'm in an emotional flashback and I'm seeing my partner look completely different to me,
Mhm.
right? Their face
Mhm.
looks different, their voice sounds different, the room, the house, my environment feels different, and I feel those sensations of I'm not safe. I can't trust this person. Um, all of these big emotions, despair, abandonment, I can now start to recognize, oh, I'm probably in a flashback.
And to know that the tools work in real time to pull us out. And it wasn't like it took a lot. It didn't really take that much, but it really justified and validated like the work that we do and that we can empower and shift our reality super quick.
Yeah. Story follows state.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
was awesome and scary.
So I want to tie this back a little bit to the topic of affective neuroscience that we've been diving into this season. So, we're talking on here a lot about how our emotions are constructed, right? Our system, our nervous system, brings in all of this sensory data, and then it goes up to parts of our brain, like our insular cortex, that's taking in all of that data. And our brain is predicting based on our past experience and also our real time environment and the sensory that's coming in to generate an emotion, right? That emotion might be joy, it might be sadness, it might be excitement, but it's putting all of that data together. All parts of our brain are working together to give the data meaning and then generate a prediction that creates a state inside. That's kind of how our emotions are constructed. So when we're in a flashback state, remember we probably had some pretty big experiences when we were little that our brain thinks are really important, or maybe it was a prolonged time of
Mhm.
experiencing neglect or abandonment or abuse or whatever it is that shapes our system to be really predicting that these sensory triggers mean this. This is the appropriate emotion to construct. And so then we construct an emotional reality that is linked to those past experiences, even though the experience is different now.
And one way that I can really recognize this too is through my disproportionate response and reaction to something. And y'all know I have that well-worn fight response. So these are some of the emotional flashback emotions that I would feel is the overwhelming defense of myself. And I used to think that that was really patterned through sexual abuse, early childhood sexual abuse. But now back to emotional neglect, I really believe that so much of that was patterned through dissociation and patterned through emotional neglect. And so, and these are some of the also related emotions to emotional flashbacks that overwhelming fear, abandonment, rejection, shame, alienation, rage, grief, and oppression. And so this all differs from like ordinary because it is so disproportionate. The reaction in the body is a very quick switch flip and it's huge. It feels like a rush and a surge in the body. And then the of course, the reaction for a fight response is either super outwardly or super inwardly. I think I experienced both. But the reaction inside the body is this huge emotional experience. And it loses its context because
Mhm.
it's not like, with fight response, you can like track back to a boundary that was broken perhaps. And it's like, you can't always track back in an emotional flashback, especially because so much of our memory is held in the body. It might not even be cognitive, and we might not be able to have like a real sense of what happened, a real knowing. You're just feeling it, feeling this neglect and abandonment and fear, but it doesn't have context.
That's right. I think that's one of the most important things to talk about with emotional flashbacks is that it's much more, most of the time, a somatic flashback. So it's different from a traditional flashback that you might hear about where somebody sees an image or like has a specific memory that comes flooding to the surface. Like, say you had a car accident and you replay that in your mind. It's not so much linked to one thing, one particular incident, and it's much more of a felt sense, a somatic experience in your body of feeling overwhelming abandonment, despair, distrust, um, self-loathing,
Mhm.
disgust, these
Mhm.
big feelings, but there's no one particular memory attached to it. There's no visual. It's just a feeling state. It's a somatic memory.
But in the case of like sexual assault and sexual violence, in the times that we actually do remember, this is where emotional flashbacks, I think, get super pervasive, right?
Mhm.
Because many of us have experienced sexual assault through the decades or
Yes.
body boundary violation really up until I walk out of this building, you
Yeah.
know?
I think you can definitely have an emotional flashback from an acute incident,
Yeah.
but I think for it to really be in the way that we're looking at it as a defining marker of CPTS, it is a shift back into that state of developmental time
Yes.
that was then permeating out into reality. And I think that makes it harder to know sometimes, like, I'm in a flashback. And so I have to start to identify, like, what are the thoughts? What are the actions that often come when I'm in a flashback? Like, if I'm starting to get really down about everything. Like, I'm failing at work. Why am I even doing this? I did so bad on this thing. And like everything is through this lens of like, I'm not enough or I'm not doing a good job. And there's a lot of shame and inner critic linked with it.
Mhm.
Then I know, wait a minute.
Yeah.
What's this narrative about? Has something happened
Yeah.
to push me into that
Yeah.
flashback
I
state?
meant more of a thread there
Hmm.
because I think PTSD really varies.
Yes.
And for people with sexual trauma histories, that often doesn't just start one day out of the blue at
No.
20
Yeah.
or whatever. You
And
know, it often already is a pattern that's been set.
that's what makes it so complicated with CPTS too,
Mhm.
because you have these other incidents, other incidences later in life, and then like we're walking through the green belt, and a bunch of men that are not maybe that are on substance and maybe not safe can trigger some of those past sexual assault experiences,
Yes.
but then those same feelings go all the way back to prolonged times in childhood where we were 100% helpless, dependent on our
Mhm.
caregivers. And so the emotions are so compounded and there's so many layers
Yeah.
when you have CPTS.
I still remember one of those men's faces. I mean, I can
From the
see
green
him
belt.
clear as day.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so curious, so interesting.
When we talk about boundaries, the first thing I want you to know is there's nothing wrong with you if giving or receiving boundaries or having hard conversations feels challenging, maybe sometimes impossible. This isn't a personal flaw or a lack of willpower. It's a protective adaptation that lives in your nervous system. Your brain learned early on that social connection is a survival need. So when a boundary feels like it might threaten attachment, your system treats it like danger, often pushing you into fawn, freeze, shut down, reflexive responses. That's why we created Boundary Rewire to help you repattern those responses at a nervous system level so boundaries can feel safe, natural, and not so stressful. It's a 5-module course packed with neurosomatic tools and guided practices, and it's only $27 through the end of the year. So join us at boundaryrewire.com and start building authentic self-expression from safety and not survival.
In 2020, after I got back from a big medicine retreat, I immediately went into the holidays about a month later, and I didn't have a lot of integration time. And in fact, if we didn't have NSI, I don't know what integration would have been like, but the holidays spun me into an emotional flashback and being under that big neuroplastic boost and experiencing an emotional flashback at the same time. Oh, it was very hard time for me. I experienced suicidal ideation and I had not been through that in a very long time, but it was all the triggers of like all the pressures that the holidays comes under, the overwhelm of the holidays, be it like financial, familial, the home setting, the relational aspects, the emotional neglect. It was so hard on me. And when it spun me into an emotional flashback, I was not sure if I was gonna live through that, honestly.
It's really tough. And like you're talking about, especially with like big peak somatic experiences that can leave people in an emotional flashback, and you have the neuroplasticity component of that going into that environment, it's really a lot. And
Yeah.
without the tools for the integration of that experience, without the emotional processing and regulation skill, like having done some preparation to help your body be able to process emotions and recreate safety, it can really leave people in a hard, dark place.
Yeah. If I didn't have you as a support to voice this through, who really understands this as well, and we'd been working in our nervous systems, if I didn't have grace,
Mhm.
I just don't even know. I kept hearing this voice that said to me, "You will not be successful, and now you will have to deal with that, whatever the outcome of trying to kill yourself is, versus like whatever you have on your plate now." So it was
Mm.
like this trifecta of many things coming through. And this is one of the reasons why I feel like having support is like It's such a big deal, and that's one of the things that we've really learned through this work over the years is that it's not just about accountability, but it's like the witness and knowing that someone is there to reflect with, to hold you in that emotionally,
Yeah.
especially with emotional neglect and emotional flashback.
And I think what you were talking about the thoughts that were going through your mind, I think it's important to remember that these defining characteristics of CPTS, they're not separate from one
No.
another. It's like when we're in the flashback, we also are experiencing the really harsh inner critic. We're
Mhm.
experiencing the toxic shame. We're experiencing the social anxiety. That's all part of like when CPTS is, when that neural programming is pulled to
Yes.
the surface, we're now in all of those distinguishing characteristics of CPTS.
It is messy and it can be very scary.
Yeah.
It was scary. It was a scary time.
And I think as we're talking about this too, it doesn't always have to be a big trigger that can bring up an emotional flashback. Like eh, that understanding that makes it easier to connect the dots, I think, sometimes, because I remember there was one time we were doing a podcast recording with Matt on emotions or something like that. And right before that, I had a gynecologist appointment. So I had to
Mhm.
go get my annual
Mhm.
exam. And cognitively, completely fine with that. It's just part of my health routine. Like my doctor, trust her, all good. And my body was experiencing a body boundary violation in that moment, right? It was weird. It was clinical. It was kind of painful. And I didn't think anything about it. But when we got back to record, I noticed that in that recording, I was totally dissociated. I ate a bunch of food after. And then for the next few days, I was inflamed. I was confused. I was having a shame response
Yeah.
in my body.
Mhm.
And so, like, just starting to understand sometimes how I don't even have to know the trigger. I was able to reflect back, and because we know what we know, I could think, "Why is this happening? Oh, wait a minute." But sometimes you don't know what the thing is in the environment or
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
situation or the conversation that brought it up, but you can still start to recognize, like, these are the patterns of a neurotag. I'm probably in an emotional flashback.
And I think you bring up a really good point too, where we have behavioral outputs to cope with the overwhelm and to almost like repress and settle the emotions that we're feeling a little bit. And you brought up you binge eating and eating a bunch of food. And I remember drinking so much through the holidays, thinking that that
Mhm.
was like helping me.
It was how we've
And
learned.
it definitely did help me, but it also furthered the dysregulation and the dissociation and, the food and the alcohol definitely didn't, and the cannabis. I was smoking so much then at the time,
Mhm.
and I was doing so much of it secretly because I didn't wanna be judged by the way that I
Compounding
was
the shame.
coping, and so I
Mhm.
was compounding the shame, exactly. I mean, it was a lot.
Yeah.
Grateful not to be there anymore, I
It's
can tell
really,
you.
I wanna, like, help people understand that this doesn't have to be a life sentence, that you don't always have to experience these. They may still come, right? Like, I'm not gonna say I'm never gonna experience an emotional flashback again, because when we're talking about an emotional flashback, it's really what is your activation threshold, right? For
Mhm.
every neurotag, there's, like, enough pieces of sensory information that are pulled to the surface to make the whole neurotag, the neurons that fire together and wire together for that pattern to play out. And so there might be situations where I reach that activation threshold. But those are definitely fewer and further between now,
Yeah.
and there is just the knowing of, like, being able to understand emotional flashbacks as a concept
Mhm,
and to
mhm.
know that that's probably what's going on, and then I don't have to be so deeply tied to the state. It's not who I am, it's just something I am experiencing as a protective output of my nervous system. It will pass. I will be able to move through it and know that that's like sometimes when we're in the tunnel, it's so hard to see the light at the other side.
Totally.
But if you have these experiences of working through it, you know that other side exists. And then getting support, like you said, people who can see the other side of the tunnel for you when you're in it and like
Mhm.
leaning into them,
Yeah,
and so that your system gets more and more experiences of going through that, making it through to the other side. And then you start to be able to recognize it better, have some tools, and have like a embodied experience of navigating through it.
Well, embodiment is a huge piece of this too, right? Because like when we're in our bodies, when we've been chronically dissociated for so long and now we're in our bodies, you're going to start feeling things a lot differently and experiencing your life so differently. And so emotional flashbacks could start to be a little bit of a part of that. But you mentioned activation threshold, and that's something that really shifts and empowers us when we work in our nervous systems daily to create safety, to get awareness, to get that altitude, to understand like, oh, the room is changing right now.
Mhm.
And to know that like 10 minutes ago, it didn't look like that. And now it looks like this.
Yeah.
And so it's like that takes also energy in the brain, energy for the brain for you to know that. And that also comes from, I think, a certain amount of safety that's created. And I think one thing too that happens with safety is that your brain learns to trust you more in a way. It's really strange, but the brain will start releasing memories to you, like pulling files out of an old cabinet. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I remember that.
Mhm.
I've,
I think it has to do with capacity,
yeah.
right? When we start to develop the capacity and maybe training our interoceptive system, starting to have some skill in emotional processing, we're connecting to those sensations more where we were maybe totally checked out from it.
Hmm.
And then two, there's something that happens like if I don't have resources, like real metabolic resources to process things, and my brain is constantly focused on like energy conservation and like surviving through the day, and my threat bucket is maxed out, these other things are not going to come up to the surface. But as I start to create space and room and skill to process, I do think things come up that then need to be worked with.
And I think with that capacity comes an emotional language that we
Mhm.
start recreating and that we learn to trust the sensations. And sometimes it's important to name those sensations and to, sometimes I think when I'm doing emotional processing, I know I'm just processing grief or I know I'm just processing rage or fear. But, to be able to have the names and recognize and trust what my body is showing me through sensation has made a huge impact on my emotional regulation, my emotional processing, and the way that like I am in the world in a sensory experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think as you were talking about too, how we can look at our behaviors and see that as a signal that I might
Yeah.
be in a flashback because I'm going to these quote unquote maladaptive self-regulation, self-soothing tools. I think sometimes the outputs can also be physical. Like we can experience physical pain
Mhm.
as a
Mhm.
protective output and know I'm in an emotional flashback. Inflammation for sure that comes with
Definitely.
the shame. And sometimes for me, it's even like numbness and tingling
Yeah.
is an output that my nervous system, brain and body produce when I'm under that heavier threat load. And so I can start to recognize some of these physical symptoms are starting to frequently occur. There's maybe something that has been activated here into this survival neurotag, emotional flashback place where these protective outputs are coming, and then start to work with my system a little to move through that.
Yeah, it's really beautiful to learn how to connect the dots in your own outputs and sensations and be like, "Oh, well now I'm getting this migraine. Like what happened a few minutes ago and like
Mhm.
what are the other activations I'm experiencing in my body and what can I track that back to?" And I think that also speaks to the work because we cannot track back, but so far if we can't remember, if we're not in our bodies and we're gone and the lens has shifted.
And the lens has shifted. And so sometimes I don't have to remember, you know?
Exactly. Yeah,
Sometimes I just
true.
work with what is present
Mhm.
to create a state shift inside or process an emotion
Yeah.
and shift the pattern in that way.
Mhm. Mhm.
So when we're thinking about this, maybe the physical pain or the feelings that come inside from a nervous system perspective, that felt sense always comes first, right? Our body detects changes in our internal signals, our heart rate, our breath, our gut activity, long before our conscious mind has the words or the explanations. So our brain reads those physiological shifts and then it tries to make sense of them by creating a story that matches the state. And that's what we mean when we say state creates the story. The thoughts, the meanings, the interpretations that we attach to what's happening are constructed after the body is already reacting to a situation.
And that's why these experiences can really feel so destabilizing because you might wake up with that pit in your stomach or notice that you're suddenly on edge with your partner, and then your mind scrambles to find the reason. And it could attach the sensation to something current. Maybe they're pulling away, or I must have done something wrong. But in reality, those stories are the brain's best guess on your physiological state. If the body feels unsafe, the brain will find evidence of danger, even when it doesn't exist.
Yeah, which is why we then use our tools to create that
Hmm.
shift so that we can come back to a little bit more grounded presence and safety. And to just touch back to that core concept in affective neuroscience that our brain is a predictive machine. We're constantly using sensory data from inside the body, our interoception, to predict what's happening and what it means. And so if those internal sensations resemble what you felt, during a past threat or traumatic experience, our brain is predicting we're in danger again. And again, that could be social danger, could be emotional danger, or it could be physical danger.
And that's why somatic flashbacks can look like anxiety, irritation, and even physical pain without context, because there is no movie of the past playing in your head. It's just sensations that don't fit the current situation. And so that shame, like we were talking about earlier, it just piles on so fast and even shifts into the lens of toxic shame, like we see with complex PTS. And so we often have these thoughts like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just calm down? But nothing's actually wrong. Your nervous system's just reliving a physiological state that hasn't been fully processed.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's so important with neurosomatic work that we really slow down and to start to have that moment where we have capacity to be able to pause and notice what's happening, start to separate the sensations from the story. And that moment where you can notice, okay, my chest is tight, or my hands are really cold, or my thoughts are racing without needing to know exactly why that is. And then you create some space between your physiology, what's happening, and the narrative that's being generated. And that pause starts to then allow us to have some intervention, to give ourselves some tools or some emotional processing. And we want to develop that skill of being able to feel and then be able to reframe as we're actually working with our body, our nervous system, and our brain to create that change.
And I think as we're about to move into maybe talking about some of these tools, we're not actually sharing blanket tools with you. This is I think, a really good place to remind you that we look at the nervous system as n equals one. And so what works for Elizabeth might not work for me and vice versa. And we definitely want to have these conversations with safety in mind first. And so we are not going to be sharing specific tools with you because we don't feel like that's staying in integrity with what we believe about the nervous system, about regulation. And so that is why we created rewiretrial.com so that you can get 2 free weeks on site and learn the tools yourself and learn to assess and reassess what kind of sensory stimulus gives you a positive response that could help you get this awareness, get this altitude, and help you start shifting your state. So please just keep that in mind. We know that it can get frustrating for you as the listener. It's that we are not sharing anything specific, but it is really with your safety in mind that we do not do that.
Yeah, and I wanna say, like, we did put a lot of really valuable content in the 2-week journey in rewiretrial.com so that even if you don't continue on the site, that is the best place to actually start to learn these tools and to work with your unique nervous system and to get a foundation, and it is really important to
Yeah,
us to
it
stay in
is.
integrity that way.
It is. So to get back to the conversation, if you start to notice that your body feels flooded and your mind starts spinning, we want to try working from the bottom up, right? From the body, from starting with the body by like creating movement in the body through the voice, through breathing, working in the diaphragm, in the vocal cords, and like giving our system new sensory information so that we get signals of safety. And then once the physiology shifts, you'll notice your thoughts naturally start to change too. And that's not magic. It's just the direction reality moves in. Body first, story second, because emotional flashbacks don't have a set duration. They could last for minutes, days, months, years, maybe even.
Mhm. And that that neurotag is always there, right?
Yes.
Survival neurotags are timeless. So
Mhm.
even if we work through and recreate more capacity, it still exists in us. It may
Yes.
just not get activated as much. And I think one of the things that I have mentioned many times throughout this conversation that has been most important for me is that awareness piece.
Yeah.
There is a place for just having the understanding of it and then starting to notice, like, what are the thought loops that occur when I'm in a flashback? Like, even if when you're in it, you can't do that. But if afterwards, like you've come out on the other side, you're feeling like yourself again, can you think about what were some of those scripts that was on a loop in my
Mhm.
mind? And
Mhm.
for me, there's one that I is like a telltale of a neuro flashback, and that's the always has been, always will be voice. Like, you have always been like this. You will always be like this. And
Yeah.
I know that me, my consciousness, my higher self does not believe that because I believe in neuroplasticity, because I believe in science, and I know that we're always changing and adapting, and that's not true. I won't always be like this. I haven't always been like this. But when I'm in an emotional flashback, that's the narrative that's playing. And so if I can find a few key sentences, statements that my brain goes to in those places, and when I start to hear that inner dialogue, I can start to know, okay, something is off. I'm in a
Mhm.
different reality now.
Mhm. Yeah, and another thing that we talk about here on too is like awareness is really important. Like there is a cognitive aspect to the work, but it's not enough on its own. Having the cognitive piece doesn't actually create the change. The change comes through our bodies. The change comes through rewiring the neural circuitry, which we
Mhm,
have total power of doing,
mhm.
right? So, but there is the cognitive piece, but like when we're talking about neurotags, it's cognitive, it's physical, it's emotional.
Yeah. Yeah. So processing some of those emotions, creating physical change with our neuro tools, and then allowing the cognitive to shift a little bit with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I think it's helpful also to think of this in terms of like the NSI framework of input, interpretation, output,
Mhm.
like the things that activate the neurotag, the quote unquote triggers, the sensory inputs, those are the inputs. And then the brain interpretation is what pulls the neurotag to the surface. And then the output is the flashback. It's the emotional state created, it's the thoughts created, it's the physical responses in the body. So the emotional flashback is the output. So can we start to change the input?
Yeah, and all of those, um, emotional flashback emotions that we were talking about earlier are also part of that output because, like,
Mhm,
for me, I used to think and now I can see, the disproportionate response, and even in the moment, like, there was something about me that knew I was overreacting, but I couldn't override it. I
mhm,
never could do that, and that brought so much shame for me because, um, like we've said so many times, when your body changes, the story changes. But I didn't have the tools at the time to know that, and so um, I I would always have thoughts like I would prove myself right. Like, see, everybody leaves.
mhm,
No one stays, or I have to fight to get attention, or to be heard, or to be seen. And then actually, that never was true.
mhm,
Because the more I fought, the more I actually pushed people away when all I really wanted was connection. But I just didn't really understand, how to do that. And those thoughts weren't random. They were part of the neurotag that I was experiencing. And so if you notice the same sentences arriving with the same body sensations, then that's a fingerprint that you can learn about your neurotags. And then after the awareness, I now or a few years ago when we started with NSI, like I could spend time being with my body and attuning to myself and gently trying to process those emotions using tools to come back to my body and create safety around the experience. And I think it's really important that we normalize the tiny cue giant wave problem because with the clink of ice in a glass or a certain laugh or the way footsteps sound in a hallway, your body can go so fast from a 2 to a 10 in a single beat. And it doesn't mean anything about our brokenness or say anything negative about ourselves. It means that our brains are efficient in survival and it learns that those cues they are linked with self protection. And so our work isn't to shame that, it's to add enough safety signals that the old link isn't the only option. We can expand from there and grow from
mhm.
the experience. And Triggers are teachers.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with us. There's something wrong with the past experiences. There's something wrong with our
Exactly,
society.
exactly.
There's something wrong with the state of the world that creates these reactions. And it's just our brain and nervous system doing the best that it can to protect us, keep
Yep.
us safe. And I think also too, we've been spending a lot of this season talking about emotional repression, emotional integration, how do we work with big emotions? So I think it's important to recognize too that there can be a component of this emotional flashback that can lead us into a repressive pattern if we
Mhm.
are someone who frequently represses our emotions, if that's a well-worn path. And so when we don't recognize that a somatic or emotional flashback is happening, then we can often slide straight into the emotional repression. And so sometimes if we repress emotions, we use those behaviors like we talk about, you go right into the binge eating or right into the substance use. And so one of the ways that we can recognize an emotional flashback when we don't clearly feel an emotion is by watching for the behavioral signatures of repression. Like, do you suddenly get hyperproductive or withdrawn or irritable or start moving into one of your patterned F responses? Do you feel that urgent need to fix things or to dive into your work? Or is that internal critic really loud? And so we might not feel the emotional sensations, but again, we can link back to the thought loops and we
Mhm.
can link to some of the behaviors that are showing up or even the physical outputs.
And the goal in these moments is not to like push through, push harder, try harder. It's actually to pause, to give the space, like you said, between the physiological and the reality that you're seeing right now, and to really, through this work, create safety for that pause, maybe for what we would consider even maybe a little bit of rest,
Hmm.
so that we do have that space for ourselves, so that we can step away, so that we can find ourselves in our bodies with our feet on the floor, feel the breath expand in the body, like maybe do something in the visual system that really grounds us so that it's something that's enough to let the emotional charge move through us without always needing to name it or to understand it, but simply just to work with it, really gently holding ourselves instead of shoving it back down. Because when we shove it back down, it is going to come cascading, particular, maybe even harder and faster. And if we can't recognize that either, and it keeps coming and coming, we just get pulled further away from our bodies, further away from the sensations and the feelings, and just taking that time to notice and to be with ourselves with that, maybe even a little bit of self-compassion woven into that, is enough to make a huge shift, sometimes without a huge cathartic release, because it's not always, the goal isn't always catharsis, it's completion. It's allowing the nervous system to discharge gently what it was holding instead of pushing it down. And, you know, we are repatterning with every one of these little steps that we can take. And it really is not about even making a huge 180 shift. It's about drops at a time of change.
I think that's so important because as I think about how I've been able to get out of that space of emotional flashbacks, some of it is using my neuro tools in the moment, having the altitude and awareness to recognize what's going on. But some of it has been my emotional processing practice,
Mhm.
right? Taking time on a regular basis to begin to mobilize my anger or my grief or move through a shame response and not doing it just when I'm in an emotional flashback, but having that be like a regular part of my self care at that deep level so that my body, when I do go into these flashbacks, I'm not thrust into the flashback. I don't have to stay there because I have the ability to I have the capacity and the, like, emotional processing skill to kinda move through that experience
Mhm. Mhm.
without it being this big flashback.
Yeah, without it sweeping you away.
Mhm. Yeah, without
Because
getting stuck in that other
we
reality.
don't want it to go on for days
Yeah.
or months.
Yeah, and when I can move through it, and that comes from a consistent practice
Yeah.
of training my interoception, minimum effective dose emotional processing, creating safety around that
Yeah.
over and over again, not in the moment of the flashback.
And it's important for people to know, like, although we're saying you can modulate, you can make a difference right now in your nervous system, it doesn't mean we change the full pattern in just that one moment. We have to continue to go into the daily practice because a lot of us has been walking these patterns for a lot longer. The trauma patterns much faster than the healing
Yeah. It's
patterns.
not a
But
quick fix,
it's not a
and
quick
it's not
fix.
like a, "Oh, here, do this tool,"
And
every
then you're
time you have an
done.
emotional flashback and you'll never have it
No.
again,
Yeah,
which
no,
I think
that's
is
not.
it would be great if that was how it was, but it's
But
just not.
as we sit here, we have noticed huge changes. Like, we
Yes.
can't even remember the last time we had an emotional flashback. Like,
Yes.
that's a really big deal. Will I ever not have one again? I don't know.
Yeah, I
I
don't
can't
know.
say that right now.
Yeah,
That's not the nervous system that I have complex trauma,
right.
so it's part of
Yeah,
it.
it's part of it, and the reality is it's a very different
Yeah.
embodied life experience for us now
Yeah.
from years of doing this work.
Yes. And we're speaking to post-traumatic growth,
Mhm.
right? This is real measurable experience from living years in emotional flashbacks to not being able to identify one. And post-traumatic growth is a huge part of our season in season 5. And I think this is one of the most hopeful parts of this work, is that realizing that change is possible.
Mhm.
Real, lasting, deep physiological change. When we first recorded these CPTS series years ago, both of us were living much closer to our trauma patterns. We were learning these tools in real time, often while still inside emotional flashbacks, through all of the outputs of complex trauma, these identifying outputs of complex trauma. So the stories that we shared then weren't past tense reflections. They were happening as we were in healing. And now these are past tense reflections. And I think we're also demonstrating that this is years of work, and I think that one of the most powerful truths about this work is about integration. Integration isn't a before and after picture, it's a continuum. And you can be in the middle of a flashback and still be in transformation and still be rewiring your nervous system.
Mhm. Absolutely. And it's a journey, right? And there's like times where we're really working on it and there's times where we take a pause and we just rest for a while and we're not always like diving back into the healing. It just kind of is dictated by what is my nervous system going to bring up, you
Yeah.
know? It's
Yeah.
not like I always have to dive back in and look for it.
Rest is huge.
Yeah.
Rest is a huge piece of healing, and
Yeah.
learning how to rest and knowing that my body might need space
Mhm.
right now.
For that repatterning to
Mhm.
like take hold.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is one of the topics that's like nearest and dearest to my heart because it's something that I have a very deep experience with, and I
Mhm.
know the pain of being in that place. And I've also witnessed it in many clients as well, right? And just the relief of like understanding this, being able to look back on life and be like, oh, I was in a flashback, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
And then having some agency to create change. This is one of the clearest points of like recognition for me in that all of this is making a shift because there was like a reality I'm very familiar with it. I know what it sounds like. I know what it looks like. I know what it feels like. And I used to spend so much time
Mhm.
in that place.
Yeah.
And I don't anymore. And so it really is like the way that I have shifted my reality.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I think about even sharing a story where I didn't want to live, I know that I'm not the only one who has experienced that with an emotional flashback. And to think that now, I mean, I would just never have that. I never have that thought of not wanting to live. And it all has come through on this work, and really creating the space for myself, for my healing and for connection and reconnection and capacity, and that life really does look very, very different, and it continues to unfold in really beautiful ways that I'm so grateful to be here and to be a part of. That, complex trauma is something that I will always have, but it isn't something that I don't have any more control of as far as the volume dials, because the volume dials used to be way turned up to the point where I was really shutting down. I've experienced cancer, autoimmune flare ups between the two of us. And it's like, I have a different agency in my life now. And I am so grateful for that, because there's just so much that I want to serve the world with. And I can't do that if I'm shut down, if I'm hiding, if I'm scared to use my voice and I'm being triggered every which where that I go and not understanding like if I when I do get triggered, because that's just part of life, right? We are going to be triggered. But now I can honor those triggers and be like, oh, something is still pinging inside of me there. It's not this huge detrimental shut me down, the world gets closed off state. The binging has changed. We had a conversation about that, you and I, yesterday
Mm,
as we were taking our hike. Like binging does not look the same for us anymore. And like
no.
that's just not even something that we really even do. I stopped drinking. I don't smoke cannabis anymore. And like it's like my protective behaviors and outputs have changed entirely. And I'm
Yeah.
deeply grateful for that. And we talked about rewiretrial.com, and like that is our gift to you, is so that you can get on site and you can be with us. Once you are on site, there is nothing that we hold back. There is no tools, no languaging that we gatekeep. And it's a huge experience um, to be a part of. It's a beautiful community to be a part of. And I cannot recommend it enough. It is an invaluable resource for you.
Thank you all for being here.
When I think about boundaries, I don't think about hard rules or ultimatums. I think about alignment, about being so attuned to my own truth that I can stay open while still honoring myself. Boundaries aren't about control, they're about connection. They're a deep return to self, to knowing what safety and authenticity feel like in your body. And when we can hold boundaries from regulation and not reactivity, they actually make our relationships richer, not smaller. That's the heart of Boundary Rewire. This course helps you rewire your nervous system so you can give and receive boundaries from a grounded, authentic place. It's packed with practices, tools, and guided support, all for $27 until the end of the year. Go to boundaryrewire.com and join us. This isn't about building walls, it's about coming home to yourself. Join us at boundaryrewire.com.